The Dallas Stars had a trade in place, a real one, signed off on, agreed to, ready to be announced. Then their own best player looked at the deal and said absolutely not, blowing up the entire plan just one day before the draft. Now, weeks later, that same star has filed for arbitration against his own team. His own teammates are reportedly furious with him, and the general manager who built a genuine Stanley Cup contender is stuck negotiating with a player who has made it very clear he is not going anywhere, even if nobody can agree on the price. This is the Jason Robertson situation, and it just keeps getting messier by the day. Let us start with who Jason Robertson actually is, because this is not some replaceable middle six winger causing headaches over pocket change. Robertson led the Dallas Stars in scoring last season, racking up 96 points, including 45 goals that tied for the team lead. On a roster full of talented forwards, on a team that made a real push through the playoffs, Robertson was the one lighting the lamp more than anyone else wearing that jersey. He just wrapped up a 4-year contract worth $31 million total, signed back when he was still an emerging young player rather than an established star. That contract expired at the end of last month, making him a restricted free agent and setting the stage for exactly the kind of high-stakes negotiation that can define a franchise's entire offseason. Robertson's path to this moment has never been the flashy, obvious kind of superstar trajectory. He was not a top pick, not a can't-miss prospect anointed the face of the franchise on draft day. He was the kind of player scouts debated, whose skating drew doubts, whose ceiling was constantly questioned, even as he kept quietly outproducing players drafted well ahead of him. Every season since he arrived in the league, Robertson answered those doubts with results, climbing steadily from promising rookie to legitimate top-line scorer, until last season cemented him as the offensive engine of a genuine championship contender. That kind of homegrown development is exactly why losing him for nothing would sting so much more than losing any ordinary rental piece. Dallas general manager Jim Nill made his priorities clear from the very beginning. Speaking on a radio interview back in June, Nill called Robertson a definite priority, noting that this was a player the organization drafted, developed, and watched grow into a legitimate star. That is not just polite front office speak. Robertson's game has genuinely evolved from a young sniper who could finish plays into a complete offensive weapon who drives possession and creates for his line mates. Every serious Stanley Cup contender needs players exactly like that, and Dallas has spent years building around him specifically because of what he brings to the ice. But here is where things got complicated fast. Contract negotiations dragged on through the spring and into the summer, with a gap between what Robertson wanted and what Dallas was willing to pay that never seemed to close. And then one day before the 2026 draft, instead of a contract extension, reports broke that Dallas had actually worked out a sign and trade agreement, sending Robertson to the Seattle Kraken. The framework was enormous. Seattle offered an 8-year deal worth $120 million total, an average annual value of $15 million a season, in exchange for giving up their 7th overall draft pick to complete the sign and trade with Dallas. On paper, that looked like a resolution. A star gets paid at the top of the market, a rebuilding team gets a bona fide difference maker, and Dallas walks away with a valuable high draft pick to reload for the future. Except Robertson said no, not to the money, to the city. Reports made clear that Robertson simply did not want to play in Seattle, and he refused to sign the long-term extension that would have made the entire sign and trade possible. Without his signature on that new contract, the trade fell apart completely, leaving Robertson exactly where he started, an unsigned restricted free agent with no long-term deal, and suddenly a very public trade attempt that everyone in the league now knew about. And Seattle was not the only team involved. St. Louis was also reportedly close to completing a deal for Robertson around the same time, meaning Dallas had multiple avenues explored to move on from their leading scorer rather than simply pay him what he wanted to stay. Think about what that says. This was not a single rejected offer that could be written off as a misunderstanding. This was a franchise actively shopping its best player to more than one destination, and that same player shutting down every single one of those options because none of them were Dallas. Word of these rejected trade frameworks did not stay quiet for long either. Once insiders confirmed that Dallas had actually completed a sign and trade agreement with Seattle, only to see it collapse because of Robertson's refusal, the entire hockey world understood exactly how far this front office was willing to go to resolve the situation. That is a difficult position for any player to be in publicly. Having your own organization confirm they tried to move on from you not once but reportedly twice, while you simultaneously insist you want nothing more than to stay. It also put considerable pressure back on Dallas because rival executives now understood the Stars were motivated sellers if the price was right, opening the door to further speculation about Robertson's future even after those specific frameworks fell apart. General manager Jim Nill has tried to stay composed publicly through all of this. Speaking to reporters after free agency opened on the 1st of July, Nill downplayed the drama, saying simply that the games do not start until September and that this entire situation is just part of how contract negotiations work in professional hockey. That is the calm, measured version of events coming from the front office. But calm front office language does not match the temperature of what has actually been happening behind the scenes, because here is what makes this standoff so uncomfortable. According to insiders, the gap between the two sides sits at roughly $2 million in average annual value. Robertson is reportedly seeking something in the range of $14 million a season. Compare that to the $15 million annual value Seattle had already offered him. An offer he turned down specifically because he did not want to leave Dallas. That detail alone tells you everything about what this negotiation is really about. Robertson is not chasing the biggest possible paycheck regardless of location. He wants to stay in Dallas on a legitimate championship roster, even if it means accepting slightly less money than he could get somewhere else. The problem is that even a slightly smaller number than Seattle's offer is still more than Dallas has been willing to commit so far. That tension has apparently spilled over into the locker room itself. Reports indicate that some of Robertson's own teammates have grown frustrated with how long this situation has dragged on, with several players reportedly reaching out to him directly, encouraging him to simply take the deal and stay. According to one insider, teammates pointed out that $12 million in Dallas, playing for a team that is genuinely close to winning a championship, goes a whole lot further than more money on a rebuilding roster in Seattle or a team like Ottawa. In other words, his own teammates are essentially telling him that the extra few million dollars is not worth risking the group's chemistry or the franchise's competitive window. Making matters even more awkward, Robertson has continued posting on social media throughout the standoff, including photos of himself enjoying international hockey competition and having what appeared to be a great time this summer. Meanwhile, insiders describe general manager Jim Nill and Stars owner Tom Gagliardi as dealing with something close to an organizational crisis behind closed doors, trying to figure out how to resolve a negotiation that keeps slipping further away from resolution. Seeing their unsigned star publicly enjoying his summer while the front office scrambles behind the scenes has reportedly not gone over well internally, adding yet another layer of tension to an already strained situation. None of this exists in a vacuum either. Robertson shares the same agent as several other prominent Dallas players, meaning every dollar committed to his eventual contract has ripple effects across the rest of the roster's long-term planning. Agents representing multiple stars on one roster often coordinate strategy behind the scenes, which means Robertson's leverage and Dallas's counteroffers are being shaped by conversations that stretch well beyond just his own camp. That adds an entire extra layer of complexity that casual fans rarely see, but one that front office executives around the league are watching extremely closely. It also means any resolution reached with Robertson could quietly set the tone for how Dallas approaches every other big money negotiation still sitting on the horizon this offseason, including the ongoing conversations with restricted free agent Mavrik Bourque, whose situation remains just as unresolved. So what happens next? On the 5th of July, facing a strict deadline of 4 p.m. Central Time, Robertson made his move. He filed for player-elected salary arbitration. This is a significant procedural step, and it changes the entire complexion of this standoff. By filing for arbitration, Robertson immediately becomes ineligible to sign an offer sheet with any other team. That matters because, according to insiders, several rival franchises had already begun internally discussing exactly that option, with some even reaching out to Robertson's camp just to gauge his level of interest in a potential offer sheet. Filing for arbitration shuts that entire door immediately, which notably keeps Robertson with Dallas for at least one more season, no matter what happens next. Before we get into what this arbitration filing actually means for both sides moving forward and just how much pressure Jim Nill is now under heading into training camp. If you love these deep dives into contract standoffs, trade drama, and the business side of hockey that never makes the highlight reels, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. We are covering every twist in this Dallas situation as it develops, and this story is far from over. Here is what arbitration actually accomplishes, and just as importantly, what it does not fix. If Robertson and the Stars cannot reach a negotiated agreement before the scheduled hearing, an independent arbitrator will step in and determine his contract for the coming season. But there is a critical detail buried inside that process. Arbitrators are generally limited to awarding shorter-term deals rather than long market-setting extensions. That means even if this goes all the way to a hearing, the most likely outcome is a one-year contract, which would send Robertson directly into unrestricted free agency next summer with zero contractual connection to Dallas beyond that single season. For a franchise trying to build sustained championship contention around a core of stars, that outcome would represent an enormous missed opportunity, locking in only short-term cost certainty while risking losing a proven leading scorer for nothing in return just 1 year later. It is worth remembering that arbitration hearings themselves can grow uncomfortable in their own right. The process typically involves each side building a case, with the team's representatives sometimes forced to argue publicly, or at least in front of an independent third party, about a player's weaknesses and shortcomings in order to justify a lower number. For a franchise that has spent years praising Robertson as a foundational piece of their championship core, walking into a formal hearing and arguing the opposite case in order to save a few $1 million carries its own reputational risk, both with Robertson himself and with every other player currently occupying that same locker room. That is precisely why some voices covering this story have described the entire Robertson saga as nothing short of a disaster for the organization so far. Dallas entered this offseason wanting to lock up a legitimate star to a long-term extension. Instead, they tried and failed to trade him not once, but reportedly twice, watched their own locker room grow visibly frustrated with the drama, and now find themselves facing a scenario where even a successful arbitration hearing only buys them one more season before the exact same uncertainty resurfaces at an even more dangerous moment, right as their championship window may be closing. And Robertson is not the only complicated contract situation on Dallas's plate right now. Fellow restricted free agent Maverick Bourque is also still unsigned, with his own one-year deal having expired at the same time. Both players share the same agent, a detail that adds even more complexity to how these two negotiations may be connected behind the scenes. General Manager Jim Nill has acknowledged publicly just how difficult the salary cap math becomes in situations like this, admitting that keeping organizational depth intact becomes the hardest part of these negotiations because star players understandably want to be paid what they believe they are worth, and it becomes increasingly difficult to say no to that request once a player has proven himself at the highest level. Zoom out for a moment and consider the bigger picture here. This offseason has already seen one franchise-altering offer sheet detonate across the league, resetting the market for elite young players in dramatic fashion. Multiple other teams are reportedly watching the Robertson situation closely as well, aware that if Dallas cannot resolve this before training camp, an offer sheet could theoretically become relevant again down the road, depending on how any short-term arbitration outcome plays out. Every unresolved star contract this summer is being measured against every other one, and Dallas now finds itself at the center of exactly the kind of drawn-out, increasingly public standoff that makes rival executives, agents, and fans alike wonder just how much dysfunction a supposed championship contender can absorb before it actually costs them on the ice. Because make no mistake, Dallas is currently built to win now. This is not a rebuilding club with years of patience built into its timeline. This is a roster with legitimate championship aspirations, one that cannot afford major distractions bleeding into training camp and the start of the regular season. Every day this negotiation remains unresolved is another day of speculation, another day of reported teammate frustration, and another day where the front office has to answer questions about a star player instead of focusing entirely on building out the rest of the roster around him. There is also a human dimension to this that deserves real consideration. Robertson has not requested a trade himself. He has not demanded to leave Dallas. Every report so far indicates the opposite, that he specifically wants to remain with the Stars, turning down more lucrative offers elsewhere, specifically because he values this roster and this opportunity to win. That loyalty in a league where superstars regularly force their way out of cities the moment a bigger contract appears elsewhere should count for something. But loyalty alone does not resolve a $2 million gap in contract negotiations, and it certainly does not repair whatever tension has quietly built up in a locker room that reportedly wants this situation resolved just as badly as the front office does. So where does this actually go from here? The most likely path, according to nearly everyone covering the situation, still points toward an eventual agreement between Robertson and Dallas, given how clearly both sides seem to want the same outcome. But getting there requires someone to move off their current number, and neither side has shown any real willingness to budge so far. If a negotiated deal does not materialize before the scheduled arbitration hearing, Dallas risks locking in only a single season of certainty, pushing this exact same crisis right back into their laps at the worst possible time, just as their championship window narrows even further. Jason Robertson wanted to stay in Dallas badly enough to turn down more money in Seattle. Dallas wanted to keep Robertson badly enough to walk away from 2 completed trade frameworks rather than force the issue. And yet, weeks later, neither side has found a way to simply say yes to each other. That is the strange, frustrating reality of this standoff. Everyone involved appears to want the exact same ending, and somehow they still cannot get there. Until they do, every single day this situation remains unresolved, adds another crack to a locker room and a front office that genuinely believed this was supposed to be their year. There is a version of this story where all of this drama becomes a footnote, a tense summer that gets forgotten the moment Robertson finally signs and drops the puck in his usual jersey come September. Front offices and star players negotiate hard every single offseason, and plenty of contentious standoffs eventually end with a handshake and a smile at the press conference. But there is also a darker version of this story, one where a genuine gap in dollars, compounded by a public trade attempt and reported locker room frustration, quietly poisons a relationship that never fully recovers, even if a contract eventually gets signed. Players do not always forget being shopped to 2 different franchises, even after the paperwork gets buried and everyone moves forward publicly. That is why every hockey fan watching Dallas right now should care about how this actually resolves, not just whether it resolves. A quick negotiated long-term deal restores stability and sends a clear message that this era of Stars hockey remains fully intact heading into a season with real championship stakes attached. A drawn-out arbitration hearing followed by a bare minimum 1-year bridge keeps this exact same anxiety alive all season long, hovering over every game, every media availability, and every ounce of the locker room chemistry that made this roster so dangerous in the first place. Jason Robertson is not just negotiating a contract right now, he is negotiating the emotional tone of an entire Dallas Stars season before it has even begun.